Well, hello, Grandma and Grandpa Smith. Who is that crazy man? Okay, we only have so much time that we can record. I just have to tell you that. Got about 15 minutes worth. And so we wanted to record you today. We have some questions for you and would love to hear your answers. Cody, what are your questions for Grandma and Grandpa?
Let me think. Have you ever been to Pearl Harbor?
I've been to Pearl Harbor. Yeah, we went to Pearl Harbor a few years ago.
We are interested especially in questions regarding your childhood. I know Grandma remembers since she was 3, and Grandpa remembers some from like 3rd and 4th grade, I think. Is that right? Can you hear me?
Larry!
Sorry.
I guess I didn't.
Okay, so we're mostly interested in hearing about your childhood.
Oh, okay.
Cody, do you have questions about childhood? Like things they remember, their first memories, their first words, things like that?
What was your first word?
I have no idea.
My first word was dog.
It's so true. Do you remember my first word?
No.
Oh, Jeff or Chris?
But you could
Or Brian?
talk very early.
Okay.
You talked earlier than the other kids.
Yes, I have a gift for that.
And people were amazed when they were babysitting you that you could talk already.
Gosh.
That's your childhood.
Oh, okay. What about your childhood?
I don't remember my first
Is that
word.
floating fish?
But I
fish
learned to
coming
talk
out
quite
there?
early. By the time I was 3, I could talk to the neighbors, and we would carry on a full conversation with sentences and everything. They
Oh.
liked to talk to me. They liked me to go over to their house and sit on the steps. I wasn't allowed inside, of course. And I
Why?
would go over there and talk to them until my mother found out that's what I was doing, and then she told me I couldn't do it anymore because I was bothering them. But I really don't think I was bothering them. I think they enjoyed talking to me.
What was your question, Cody?
Huh?
You asked why. Why weren't you allowed to go over there?
Yeah.
Oh, because your mom thought you were bothering them.
Yeah.
No, up the steps.
Well, she wouldn't want to hear what my first word was.
Well, I had
What?
to stay.
Well, it would hurt your ears.
Oh,
Can I hear it?
a naughty word?
Where?
What?
No, it was a loud scream.
Oh.
Help!
Oh, is that your first word?
No.
Oh.
I have no idea. I don't think it's even, I have a baby book, but I don't think anybody wrote it down. I never wrote down anybody's first word. I never knew they'd want to know it.
I think Cody wanted to know about your first jobs.
No, I want to know about
Well-
World War II.
World War II. Do you remember anything about World War II?
Yes, I remember lots of things about World War II. When World War II started, I was just barely, I wasn't quite 2. It started on the 7th of December, and I wasn't born till the 23rd. But that's the year I turned 2. So I don't remember anything about the start, but I remember a lot about the war. Because my mother liked to take me to the movies. She liked to go to the movies, and she didn't know anybody who would take care of me. So she had to take me, and I had to sit very still. I wasn't allowed to squirm or move my feet or anything. I could move my one finger in my hand was all I was allowed to move. But back then, the movies were different. For one thing, they were all in black and white. There were no color movies
Were
around.
they silent?
No, they had people talking in them by then. That was in the 1930s, and I wasn't even born then. But the movie would show first what was coming in the next movie, coming attractions they called it, and they'd show you part of it so you'd want to come and see it. And then they would show you a short movie that would be maybe telling you about a national park or something like that. And then the
Like
next,
an advertisement or a
well, it wasn't an advertisement. It was really more an educational thing. And then after that, they would show you the news, because of course there were no TVs at that time. So the only way you could see things actually happening was through a camera. And so then they would show you the news, and the news was all about the war. You would see people soldiers, enemy soldiers, coming right at you, and it scared me. I wanted to hide under my chair, but I wasn't allowed. And they had guns and things, and they were going to shoot me. And then they would show you the president and what he was doing, and they would show you poor people who were suffering because they were being killed. You didn't actually see the killing, them dying on the news, but you knew that's what was happening. And then they would show you how they were warning the enemies that the airplanes were coming, and the airplanes would come over, lots and lots of them, dropping bombs. So I learned a lot about World War II that way.
But what was the movie like?
Well, it was a black and white movie. There were no colors in it. And it was a bunch of short movies, really, like maybe 1 or 2 minutes long. Like for 1 or 2 minutes, you have these guys coming right at you with guns. And then they might show you what was going on in the ocean, and they might show a ship getting blown up, but you wouldn't really see the people.
Or
just see
you
the
could
ship.
have seen the world's biggest fish being caught.
Oh no, this was all war. War was what was important then to everybody, because pretty well everybody knew at least one person who was fighting over in the war overseas. And of course a lot of people got killed. In my neighborhood, just in the few houses around me, there were several houses that had kids in them. And there were two families of children who lost their father. He never came home. He got killed in the war and they never saw him. And the kids were young enough that they probably never remembered him. They never knew their father because he was dead. I remember one man they brought home in an ambulance. And I guess he had yellow fever, which is a very serious disease that kills people. So he came home, and he was home for a few days. And then the ambulance showed up, and they took him to the hospital, and he died. And that was all about it. And everybody knew people who had died.
I want my daddy.
Yeah, I imagine they didn't even know their daddies. They didn't even remember them because they had gone to war.
Do you remember the air raids?
Yeah, oh, I certainly remembered the air raids. Where I lived in Ohio, no enemies actually got that far, but on the coast, like in Florida, it was possible that an enemy airplane could come over and drop bombs on you, so you had to hide where you were. At night, all the lights were turned off. The only way you could have lights in your house is if you had what we called blackout curtains, which were black curtains that would go over your windows and completely hide what was inside, so nobody could see the lights, so that the enemies couldn't find out where your city was. And everything was black at night. And one time, we had an air raid master, and he would go out and check and make sure that he couldn't see anybody's lights or anything. And nobody could drive cars around with lights on either, so people couldn't go out at night because you couldn't show any lights at all. And one night they had a pretend bomb dropped. And so I watched, they had people lying in the street and they were supposed to be hurt, and the medics were coming and taking care of them, and this is all happening in the dark. It was light enough that I could barely see what was going on. And
So
of course,
was it?
nobody really been hurt. It was just a practice.
Yeah, it was just a drill.
Yeah, just a drill. But if you lived on the coast, like if you lived in Florida, where Uncle Jeff does, you could have looked out into the ocean and actually seen the enemy submarines going up and down looking for boats to sink. They were really out there, and you could see them.
So were the beach? So you couldn't go to the beach?
Well, you could go to the beach during the day, but I don't know if you could go to the beach. I don't know what the answer is on that.
Because you didn't really have any beaches.
You had beaches, but you didn't want to get killed. And these boats were out there. They were submarines, but sometimes they'd come to the surface. And they were looking for American ships to sink. And if they saw an American ship, they would send a torpedo and it would blow the ship up and it would go down. And people could actually see that. And that was scary.
Do you remember when Pearl Harbor happened?
No, I was too young at that time.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember that. My earliest memory was when I was still just 2. And one night there was a big fire. This was a night where it had been raining, and then it turned to ice. And so everything was covered with ice. And it just happened that that night, there was a big country club, had a big building, and it was down at the bottom of the hill down by the lake, Lake Erie. And it caught on fire. And of course they called the fire department. We heard the sound of the sirens and everything. And we went out into the backyard with our coats on. And my dad was holding me in his arms because I was scared. The whole sky was red with flames. And you could see the flames. And what happened was the fire engines got to the top of the hill. And the hill was completely ice. And they couldn't go down. And all they could do is stop and sit there and watch the building burning up.
Can I tell you what I would do?
Big building.
If they had a water guns or hoses, I would just shoot from up there.
Well, it was too far away
Yeah.
to do any good.
Hey, why don't they, instead of filling, what about they fill an airplane's bomb with water? So
Well,
it'll explode water.
I don't know if they probably had invented that by now, but all the airplanes were in use fighting the war.
Oh.
There weren't, it was unusual to see an airplane flying around. You just didn't see them very much because most of the airplanes were over at the war. And the airplanes weren't good like, they're very primitive airplanes. There were no jet planes at all. They hadn't been invented yet.
So what
And
happened?
so the
when
planes
fire-
that you saw were usually pretty small and they didn't hold very many people. And people could take a trip on an airplane. I don't even think they flew at night. I think they flew during the day mainly. And they could take a trip if they wanted to. But it was a very bumpy, scary ride if you wanted to ride on an airplane. My dad wouldn't even go on an airplane because he'd been on one that had almost crashed.
How did it almost crash?
What?
How did it almost
I
crash?
think it got mixed up with a storm. And the airplanes weren't strong like they are now. An airplane now can fly through a storm, no problem. But back then, the airplanes were not very strong. They were not very big and not very strong. And you just had to hope. If they hit an air pocket, they were going up and down, and you'd be afraid.
Did you want to ask about how they made money as kids?
Yeah. How did you do that?
Did you
Well,
make any money as a kid?
No, not really. I got an
Babysitting
allowance.
or, oh, you got an allowance?
I helped around the house and I got an allowance. That's all I did.
What about you, Grandpa? Did you make money as a kid?
Oh, yeah, we delivered papers,
Yeah.
newspapers. And we had to deliver every morning and, except Sunday and every night. So we had 13 times we delivered newspapers and, we got $11 a week
Wow.
to do that, so,
Back then,
And that was a
was-
lot of money.
yeah.
Yeah, was that like $100?
Oh, more than $100.
So that was between you and your brother, or?
Well, my brother and I, yeah, we both delivered 200 papers apiece.
Wow.
Did you save the money to go to college?
And, oh, yeah, yeah, we were up in the morning at about 4:30, 5 o'clock every morning and going out to do this, and then we could go back to bed and sleep for a little while longer when we got home. But we took us an hour and a half to, about
Where
an hour
did
and a half.
Grandpa live when he was little?
Where'd you grow up, Grandpa?
In Kansas City, Kansas, way out west. Yeah,
They all live in the Wild West?
that's where,
That's
uh,
what his cousin thought.
yeah, that's where, what's her name, Dorothy lived.
Oh yeah, The Wizard of Oz.
Yeah, the Wizard
Wizard
of
of
Oz. You
Oz.
remember that story?
No, we haven't watched that.
Oh, okay.
And my cousin Kenny,
Oh,
my cousin Kenny, he was actually killed in Vietnam in the war.
Oh.
When the war in Vietnam was going on.
That was a later war.
Yeah.
I know I've heard of it.
Yeah. Yeah, my brother was put into the army in the war in Vietnam. And he was very lucky, though. He'd been in college, and he'd been learning how to be a soldier. And so when it was time to send his group of people, I think he said there were 20 or 30 people in his group, over to Vietnam, they chose all but 2 to go to Vietnam. And he was one of the lucky ones who didn't have to go. And the reason he didn't have to go is because he was such a good salesman, talking people into things, that they figured he could do a better job recruiting soldiers. And that's what he did during the war. But it was very hard for him because he knew that some of the kids he was talking to and talking them into going into the war would never come back. They would die.
And that was in Pittsburgh, or just in Pennsylvania over here,
Yeah.
where he worked.
So that's what he did. And he can tell you about the riots that they had.
Yeah.
And he had to go downtown and check and see if they had blown up or set fire to the building that they were using. And so he had to pretend that he wasn't a soldier. He had to disguise himself.
Why were people rioting?
Probably against the war.
Yeah, that was the main thing, was the war. People were really against that war.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And especially the younger people rioting because they didn't want to go. They didn't have a choice. Some of them had a choice and joined, but a lot of them, they had what they called, what did they call that? When they were put into the war. Somebody's
The
got to remember
draft?
that word.
The draft?
Draft,
Yeah.
thank you.
A
They had a
yeah.
draft, which means that they had the names of all the people of a certain age. And they would draw names out of it, and the people whose names got drawn, they had to go to war if they liked it or not.
And I was draft exempt because I was a college student. And whenever you were a college student, you didn't have to go. But when you got out of college, depending on what job you got, you might have to go. And my brother had to go, well, he had to join the military, but,
What jobs do you have to go to?
well, I was an engineer with NASA, so I didn't have to go. Yes, I worked for
Yeah.
NASA.
Yeah, during World War II, they were doing the same thing. They would just pick names, and the people